Morning, everybody.
Okay.
I guess I'll start since I'm the table representative. I didn't know I was going to be a representative.
Highly compensated position.
So, my name is Jim Siner. I'm an Auburn grad, War Eagle. I was involved in starting the Apparel Advisory Board 5 years ago for the university. Actually, Carol approached me and another individual to start the advisory board. So I've been involved for the last 5 years. I co-chaired the board for about 3 years, and now I'm kind of serving my last 3-year term. So I love giving back to the university. I've been in the industry for 36 years, 9 years in engineering. Worked for companies like Carhartt, Jockey, and most recently with VF. And I was downsized in December, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. So I have done some consulting recently, and I'm in the process of looking at other jobs. So it's good to be here this morning.
Good. My name is Jenny Lee. I'm a graduate student volunteer, and I've been instructed that I am a silent partner today. So I'm just here to help keep you on track. So thank you for doing this.
My name is Jamie Campbell. I'm the application specialist for CAD and 3D simulation at Human Solutions. Before that, I was a student at Central Michigan University. My degree is in fashion merchandising and design. That's about all I got.
My name is Amrut Savashar. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Consumer and Design Sciences Department. Sorry, I was late. I taught one class just now and came back from that class. So I was running from there. I teach primarily in the merchandising area, retail math, any of the courses which are apparel merchandising, retail management, all those. And this semester I'm teaching entrepreneurship in apparel. That's something new I'm doing this semester. My background, I am a textile engineer primarily. Basically, I completed my bachelor's in textiles from India. I worked in the textile industry, primarily in the design and development area of the fabrics, worsted fabrics and shirting fabrics. So that was my background. But then I came to US for my master's, and then I changed my focus from manufacturing to more business-related aspects. So now I focus on retailing and consumer behavior and sustainability in apparel, all those aspects. So I did my PhD from Iowa State University. I was in the Midwest for 5 years. Joined here last year as a faculty. That's kind of my background.
Good morning, I'm Jess Knowles with 3DMD. I handle the Americas of the company, so I work across 30 different disciplines involving everything from apparel companies like Under Armour and Lululemon and others that are in that world, but I also spend a lot of time with the military, both in terms of making new ears and noses and other body parts for wounded warriors, medical manufacturing kind of side, the maker side, as well as the apparel, designing new leak-proof eyewear against laser weaponry and body armor and other types of things. So while a lot of my time is in the medical world, I'm also converging with apparel and other things as well. We do a lot of facial recognition, so I work with the CIA and the FBI and the Army on facial recognition. So really anything involving three-dimensional digital technology. So we have some interesting perspectives because we're across so many different disciplines of how it's all merging together, and that'll be one of my things today, to see how it cuts across so many different things and age groups and all that.
Good morning, I'm Hong Ju. I'm a faculty member in Consumer and Design Science at Auburn. I'm originally from Seoul, South Korea, which is really focused on the apparel industry. After I finished my education there as a college student, I came to United States for graduate programs, and I got my degrees from North Carolina, Greensboro, which is another kind of town for the textile industry. And my background is more toward like a merchandising and buying side. I have a really short industry experiences as a buyer and fashion forecaster. And after that, after I joined Auburn University, I'm teaching merchandising classes. And this semester, I'm teaching global sourcing.
I'm Keith Hoover. I work for Under Armour. I have a diverse background. I was an art major in college, liberal arts major up in a small school in Wisconsin. And I was a fashion illustrator for a while, and then I worked for Ralph Lauren as the art director, and then in Ralph Lauren started an R&D facility in Greensboro where they were bringing in industry guys to work with the product people. So I moved to Greensboro and started in color science and apparel, and since it was about 10 years there, and then I worked for the Loom for a while. I was at Grapes, and it's a joke. I oversaw when they had domestic dye houses, I oversaw their dyeing. And then on to Target, Lands' End, and JCPenney, setting up color processes and material processes. But Under Armour, you heard about Lighthouse yesterday, and that's been my focus there, is trying to figure out what this business model looks like to shift gears. That's me.
I'm Lee, faculty member at Indiana University, Bloomington. So I originally come from China, so I got my bachelor and master degree from China, and I worked for Christian Dior, a luxury company, as a PR coordinator there in Beijing, and then decided to pursue a PhD in US, and I went to PhD program in Mizzou, and we met Serena, we met each other at that time. I'm very interested in global supply chain because I have lots of friends that are working in manufacturers in China. And also in China, when I was working for those Western companies, I do see there's a gap that as an educator or like industry people, we want to kind of fulfill that gap. And then I teach product development and global sourcing. So it's kind of both like design side and as a merchandising side. And I do see our students, like when they're looking for jobs in this industry, and sometimes they just cannot figure out their position in this industry, and they don't know their career path. And especially when we have these new and emerging technologies, right? And I do hope we could bring those updated information to our students and better deliver, these kind of cool things to our students to help them better prepare the future industry, future career. So that's my goal, and that's why I'm here.
Very good. I just failed to mention I've been in supply chain so my entire career. So I've started factories, shut factories down, turned factories around, worked in sourcing for most of my career as well, opening, closing contractors. So I've kind of done a lot, lived in a lot of countries, been out of the United States for 26 years in 4 countries. And was kind of a competitor, I guess, with Keith. I was with Jockey for nearly 20 years, and I wasn't the grape. I don't know what I was. So anyway, I guess we need to start then reviewing topic 1 and going through the 3 questions. So you want to lead the discussion on the first question, perhaps?
So topic 1, looking at design. First question, okay, coming from your various backgrounds, thinking about emerging digital fabrication technology and designs, how do you see traditional designers evolving? How do you see it going forward in the future? Any immediate thoughts?
So I actually have a question about this. So I see like we have a kind of very brief description about like who will be designer or who is designer. But for 3D printing, I'm thinking one day if consumers, they have 3D printers at home, can they also be a designer? Design some fashion pieces for themselves. So it's kind of not that clear role, right? So that's my question. And I do find that today's designers, of course, like at school, right, they learned some fashion illustration or just the basic 2D design skills. And if they really want to build a model-based software, and they want to use 3D printer, do they have to learn like coding, or they actually will be collaborating with someone who knows software, how to build model and how to code, and they just need to add their design elements into the like model build process. So that's kind of a question always in my mind.
So you're saying, I think it's a good point, roles are emerging.
Right,
Not
right.
going to be clear-cut roles in the future.
Right.
Especially when children are learning these technical things in junior high and high school and even elementary school, how to use these things. People can be their own designer / maker / user if they know what they're doing.
The only problem with that is, back in the 90s, a friend of mine was he taught desktop publishing when desktop publishing became big. And he would get a group of people together, and the first project, they would design a newsletter. And he said, without fail, the first project always looked like a ransom note, because people aren't necessarily good designers, and they're taking all this stuff and they're trying to throw all these fonts in, and so the democratization of design doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be a good designer, but you'll have access to good designs.
I mean, doesn't it start with a pen and paper, pencil and paper?
I still think
the true designer, don't they just start with a sketch?
Yeah, I think so, but I think where I see the future of design is, right now we have designers that do their sketches and then they send them to a factory overseas, and the people in the factory have to figure out, well, in some cases, I mean, there's technical design going on, but there's still, the factory has to take that tech pack and figure out how to make something, and that's where a lot of the back and forth and the time is required today. So I think either through the logic built into the software or more training for designers, they should be able to hand off something that's ready to go to manufacture.
Yeah, so for the current design, live planning, so we have like a creative design team and technical design team. And a lot of fashion companies today, when they do global sourcing, they actually put technical design in those manufacturers.
They actually what?
Oh, they actually put technical design in manufacturers. So they ask those technical designers there to do the pattern making or establish some specifications. So probably the future designer, they have to know, or they have to be able to kind of go back to the several, many years ago. You have to do both, like creative
So ideally,
design
wouldn't
and
it be the
negative
best
design.
scenario to have the designer in the factory?
Or at least familiar with the factory. Because I mean, a lot of designers visit factories and they sit in the showroom. They're not actually out on the floor. So I think, Jim, you must have seen designs that are so complicated that you've got 20 parts when you need 7 or something to that effect. So there's got to be some. And it's not, I mean, I think if some sourcing people, if they had their way, you'd have a T-shirt with no sleeves, and it'd be circular knit, so simple design. But there's got to be a consideration for the manufacturing process at the design level.
I think we need to understand the needs of all these different players, of different stakeholders here. So I don't want to kill the creativity of a designer by overwhelming him or her to learn so many technical things. But at the same time, I want them to perform their job more efficiently or effectively in communicating what design or whatever the design process they are working on. So we need to keep a balance between the technical aspect of it as well as the creative aspect of it. So that's where I see the future designer. So it's not all just, will be just technical. And then I think going back to your point, making all the things more objectified or more digitized in a way so that the communication across all the channels or all the entities is more uniform and without any errors or any of the kind of, it's like unknowns, I would say.
then 3 or 4 other companies come the next time, they
Yeah.
push,
Shall we move on to the next question?
Mm-hmm.
How do you perceive the dynamic changes in current and or future designers in terms of expanded or shifted range of knowledge base, skill set, and interdisciplinary design approach?
What is this even worth? Really? Because it's
Actually, go back to your answer. I do agree, like creative designers or technical designers, or what kind of positions in the fashion company, you have to kind of specialize in certain things, right? So that's why we can, that is what we can do things kind of effectively and efficiently. But the thing is, today, 3D printing, I do believe this technology asks you to learn more. So you cannot just stay in the showrooms. You have to know, probably not that detailed, but you have to kind of be very open-minded,
Well, I
right?
think these skill sets in this, what we're calling a new style or a different design, varies between the company. If you're a company that's producing commodity product, and so I worked for Carhartt for almost 5 years. So, okay, how much can you do to a pair of jeans, right? I mean, what can you do? Yeah, you add a cell phone pocket, you make the belt look bigger, you make the waistband smaller. To me, that's not design, okay? And so does a company like Carhartt that's making workwear truly need a technical designer, or do they need a really good merchandiser that knows how to figure out what the end consumer is looking for and make some changes to existing product? And it never felt like to me that that was true design. There's no one sketching new products. So they're either making vests and coats and overalls, coveralls, bottoms, jackets, hats. There's only a limited amount of product, and so they're just really kind of changing what they're already making. And so I think the needs vary depending on the brand and the fashion aspect of whatever they're making.
Right.
But I'd say even with a product like Carhartt, I mean, if you look at Duluth Trading as a comparable company, not quite the same, but they're introducing construction techniques into the pants, for instance, to differentiate them, to make them more comfortable and stuff. Even though they're basic workwear, they're commodity stuff. I think there's also like an industrial designer role that looking at it as what's the problem to be solved here, and rather than just changing the pocket placement or whatever. So I think for a company to grow, I mean,
They have to reinvent themselves.
yeah, they've got to, and maybe they don't have to be doing fashion stuff, but they certainly can be, differentiating themselves against their competitors.
So that's up to the designers to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's know your product. So if you're going to do crepe de chine blouses, that's one thing. If you're going to do workwear, it's another. But it's still, you have to know what the problem you're solving is.
And I do find interdisciplinary design approach. This is a great question because currently when we teach fashion design, we actually never, like based on my experience, we never get any kind of engineering background people or informatics people, or sometimes probably we have some business, aspects, but we never collaborate with those cool engineering guys. So, but if we have this new technology, I think designers, they don't have to be the experts on engineering stuff, but they have to know how these engineering innovations could help them to better design, the apparel products.
So it's always important, and for me, it's always been important to bring the merchandisers to the factory, okay? To have, a lot of companies have programs where, if you work for a jeans company, you got to sew a pair of jeans. You may be in finance. You may be in sales. You may be in marketing. You got to sew a pair of jeans. Once you do that, it changes your perspective on what you're doing because it helps you understand, to your point, you can design and make one, but can you make 100,000 of these? Can you scale it? And just sitting down on a felling machine, closing the inseam on a pair of jeans will break you down. and help you understand how difficult, you know, some of what maybe the design, you know, sends to the factory or to a contractor says, yeah, we need to make this. It's like, whoa, do you know what you're asking for? So,
And one of the things we're looking at is the knowledge that's required to cost goods based on construction and other factors that an engineer at the factory would consider. If that can somehow be integrated into the design software so that you're getting cost feedback when you're designing something. If you do something that looks real cool but is incredibly complex to make, then you either have to be willing to pay the price that garment's going to sell at this level, not at this level, or you need to change your design so that you have immediate feedback instead of guys scratching their head in the factory saying, what were they thinking?
what's the retail price? And you're running it all the way backwards, and you go, no, you can't spend $9 a yard on this fabric.
Right.
So it's pretty, we like it, but you
Well,
don't even be
in
able
the
to
case
sell
of
it.
jeans, I mean, you're going to beat the heck out of that fabric anyway in a post-wash, so why would you spend the money on the premium grade to begin with?
Going back to her point, I feel that I can say maybe jack of all and master of one. So all the entities we are talking about, for example, designers are collaborating with the technical people in the sense, people who are actually developing softwares for their needs, to meet the designer's needs. So these people are mastering developing the technical stuff of the software, and designers are master of their own trade. But they need to understand each other's needs and share the information so that they are jack of all the trades and master of their own trade as well. So I don't know whether, but then there should be flexibility in understanding each other's needs in terms of developing products. I think so far what we have is master of each of trades, but there is no collaboration or interdisciplinary approach or things like that to connect all the dots together to bring that cohesiveness or consistency between all the people.
What are some of the challenges that you foresee for future designers in transitioning into the new era of innovative manufacturing?
Resistance.
Yeah, inertia.
Being adamant not to change, to embrace the change.
Well, it's becoming a tsunami, so they're going to,
Do or die situation.
again, with people coming up, having been using technology since the time they were little children, and more advanced and more advanced technology, people resistant to change are going to be swept away. If I don't adapt, I die in the corporate sense or the employability sense or whatever the case may be, whether I like it or not.
That's surprising. Even the young generation of the students, I expected more kind of like a lower level of resistance from them because, of course, they're born with the technology. But surprisingly, still this generation of students have that sort of like a fantasy about the fashion world. So they're still dreaming about like just making their own garments with all kinds of like a couture like details. And when we are trying to explain that, you need to learn about this actual like hands-on skill, like using the machinery products and using facilities to become a real designer who works for the industry. Then they're a little resistant. They're like, oh, I chose this major to become a designer, not like an engineer or like an operator of the machinery. So I think we need to put some effort in kind of like a reforming their conceptual
Explain what the
about
position
the
is.
role of the designer.
Explain the role better.
Because unless they are targeting to work for the like a real kind of like a high-end designer brand, like having still clear lines and just targeting for the small range of the market. They need to target the whole like a mass production industry. In that case, they need to get familiar with the technical side of the industry.
Well, going off that, the perception of it is a job in the fashion industry as a whole. I mean, I went to school for fashion, and now I work for a software company. And when I tell people that, they don't see the connection between the two. And when you look at my job, it makes perfect sense. But to someone looking in, they don't understand the connection between the technology.
So they're only seeing the glamorous part
Right,
of what the
yeah,
job
they don't-
is, and the work part's like, what do you mean you don't?
Right. And they just think, oh, you can get a
Just go
job
to
in
Paris
fashion
and you
industry.
go to fashion shows.
You roll in a futon at 10 in the morning, you go change some things, and then you go home. But no, actually, I think, I mean, when you look at, you know, we changed from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, so it's kind of like design as a service, not, you're not getting your hands dirty. So I think, you know, from a school's perspective, you know, co-op programs or something that requires immersion in the real world, and not just at the fashion design offices, but at the factories, at the mills, to whatever extent possible. And you know, if you know Auburn has international programs, so it wouldn't be going to Georgia to work in a factory. It could be working in Korea or China or anywhere. So, but I think, you know, that's to understand what's required to make garments. You know, it puts context behind it.
That makes me remind of one of the collaboration programs that I observed at UNC Greensboro. We had a faculty member from Thailand, which is a key player in the global fashion industry, which is more toward like a supplier perspective. And he launched a collaborative, like a video chat with his class in the United States, with another class in the Thai university in back home. And then students kind of like notice the difference between their perspective, because American students are heavily educated about the branding, merchandising, buying, marketing, which is more like toward the end of the supply chain. And then those Thai students were heavily educated about like textile supply chain, production, manufacturing, kind of like the beginning stage of the supply chain. So I think it's a great idea to have some collaborative opportunities, because even those kind of like education programs are toward a different side of the supply chain, depending on the environment of their nations.
The same here, because here in the U.S., sometimes you really want students could see manufacturers, but it's just hard to find especially innovative manufacturing things for them. So we do have a Hong Kong internship program. So we take students to China or Hong Kong, and they can see manufacturers there. Yeah.
In our college, we have a emphasis on global education. So we have 7 different study abroad programs. So Aricia, Italy is one of the best ones I think we have, where students spend the whole semester in there. And then there are some others, like I think there is one Fiji, New Zealand, there is one Nepal. So just exposing to different cultures and just trying to understand the processes there. So we are, I believe we are at the 50% mark or so, but we want to increase that number. So we want to have every student to go and study abroad.
Serious one in Fiji?
There is a Fiji, New Zealand program.
Dude.
There is no like modern
To
Fiji.
go now?
And there are students who volunteer for that.
But yeah, there is one. There are 7 different ones. There is one in Cuba as well.
Wow.
It's all military uniforms. Shake of every hands.
Yeah.
We talk about the topic first, like design the topic 1 first, and then topic 2 and topic 3.
So your thought process
about how you think, less about the skills, more about how you think.
I really enjoyed last night's presentation, the keynote speech. I canceled my global sourcing class and required the students to come to the speech.
Oh.
And I didn't expect that you're going to touch on a lot of information about sourcing, so I was so excited.
Very relevant.
It was worse to cancel the class because this is sourcing.
So how do you think, how do you guys, oh, okay.
Because of limited time, I'm gonna go ahead and ask this group user group, because they're the most prepared. If Jim could help share the key points for your group. It may help if you turn that. So we can say.
Okay, no problem. I have 3 minutes and 30 seconds, I think. All right, we have 10 minutes and everybody's got to present.
Well, we all have just 10 minutes. We gotta
Oh,
quickly go over.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so, I just wrote this question up here, what does a future designer look like, okay, in terms of this first topic? One of the things we mentioned was a designer should be familiar with manufacturing, even to the extent that maybe, if they're embedded somehow in the factory, the proximity is very important, especially when we're talking about lead times and speed to market. We also said there needs to be a balance between the technical and the creative, aspects of the position. Kind of a better understanding of, well, I can sketch this design, but can we really make it? Right? Can you make 10,000 of these? Having the ability to reinvent the product to meet the consumer needs, and so that was kind of a discussion around, all right, what exactly does the designer do in each of these different brands? Because if it's a really fashion type oriented company, obviously the skills there need to be different than, say, in my example was I worked for Carhartt for 4.5 years, and I never felt like we really had designers. They were just taking existing product and modifying it to meet some consumer need or a problem. So that's really important, I think, to understand that there's different levels or skills depending on where the student or where the designer might be working. Keith mentioned about the cost information, and he mentioned that yesterday in his presentation, which I think is so key to what we're doing today. Is there a way that the costing of products somehow could be embedded in the software that the designers are using so that they're not designing product that ultimately can't really be sold or mass produced? So that knowledge base around costing we feel like is very important for the designer. Bringing the designers to the factory I think is also very important. I mentioned that I've worked for companies that, okay, I worked for Jockey for 20 years and everybody had to sew a bundle of underwear to understand the actual complexity around doing that. At VF, we have finance people sewing jeans, okay? So they really understand that. I think it's important, more so really for even the designers to be there. And as far as how they're going to adapt to the new technologies, I mean, it's kind of a do or die situation is kind of what I heard at the table. And we can also do a better job probably by preparing the students to understand their role, because I'm hearing from some of the folks that we have students going through these curriculums and they envision what this job is going to be like, and I think it's a little more glamorous than probably what it really entails. So how can we better prepare them, define the position, help them to understand really what it is they're going to be doing for the company or for the brand that they go to work for. So you had much better notes than me, so if you want to do some color commentary, please, please do. Pardon me?
They're not supposed to say anything for data collection purpose, the volunteers.
Okay.
Do we want to move on?
Okay.
So I think we kind of worked backwards a little bit on the topic. So we kind of started with a little bit of what the challenges are and really what we need to do on the front end to outfit designers in the future to be successful in the industry that they're pursuing. So some of the major things that we really identified is the role of the designer has become increasingly more technical and more complex. So whereas 3D was kind of an auxiliary tool that some designers use, that is really becoming a standard tool that you will need to be able to work in some system going forward, especially with rapid manufacturing and the types of outputs these the software can create. This allows you to have a quicker handoff to your engineers, etc. And additionally to that, a lot of it was just the thought process. Designers, if they don't necessarily have these technical skills incorporated, need to at least understand it well enough so that when they are communicating with the teams that are supporting these parts of the product, that there's a clear understanding between both groups. So software engineering and again, manufacturing is super important. If you can't make it, you can't design it. End of story. So understanding cost, understanding feasibility is incredibly important. So, and that was also one thing we kind of just expand on that a little bit is, a designer can take on the mantle of the more they know about the feasibility of what they're trying to create, they can push the conceptual side of it much further, right? So, do I really need to know all the engineering? No, but for me, there's benefit in it, right? So that is definitely a thought process I'd like to imbue or see imbued into designers going forward. Is that these other factors really are being considered when they're actually doing their conceptual work. Additionally, one of the things that we really saw as one of the major challenges, and it's a historic one, is the design and engineering ballet. Hey, I have this cool idea. Can you make it? Nope. Okay, what can we do? And there's this back and forth. So it's definitely already incorporated into the designer's core studies as far as visualization training and visual communication. I think one thing too that could really help bridge that gap is to incorporate some of the more core classes like that into an engineer curriculum, so that when because ultimately an engineer is going to have to deal with designers at some point in their career, more than likely, right? So if they understand the language between the two, that's additionally going to help save you time and save you headaches. So, and then kind of an overarching theme about the tools was there's things going on with like IEEE right now about standardizing body scanning and the outputs and what are the parameters that need to be there for the standard. The UI and even the tools within 2D and 3D software suites have started to naturally kind of move that direction where, well, if they call it this and most of the customers who want to get on our product are using theirs, maybe we should have some similarity between ours, right? But that's just kind of a natural evolution that's happened. But I do see an opportunity for software developers to kind of come together and say, hey, we really should create a standard pictograph library that communicates these tools because they all really do the same thing. And we just agree to call it the same. And I think, from kind of those three different points, it'll help designers not only be more successful in what they're doing, but also more successful within their team as far as communicating.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ours was kind of focused on digital fabrication, being the maker hot over here. And one thing that we identified early on was we had to change the workflow, how we flow through the process of educating the students to actually educating the designer or engineer to fabricate or to create this process. And that's training from the machines to the actual digital content. And that's kind of what we kind of felt that was really passionate. I think we really got stuck on education of how we get below 7th grade. So 7th grade and above can get funding, but K through 6, no funding. So how do we change that paradigm? Is it partnering with companies to do sponsorships, or is it a federal institution thing where we can kind of partner with that? We also identified materials. So even if we do empower the students or the designers of the future to use digital fabrication tools, the fabrication method of materials and post-processing are still quite weak. They're not able to really elevate the process of what they would actually feel and get tangible. One big point too is future designers are no longer just a designer. They may be a mechanical engineer and a software engineer, or they may be all three combined. You know, there's gonna be a lot more algorithms written for patterning, and I mean patterning from the actual shape of the garment, but also patterning actually the shapes inside the garment. So if it's gonna be a textile of negative points out ratio for aesthetics, or if it's just a colorful pattern like we see on the floor here. That's it.
Thank you,
That's where we
Alan.
stand.
So next we're going to flip to page 6 and forward to the maker topic. So volunteers help us stay on track.
Jamie, can I ask you to do the more little detailed notes, and I'll try to just pick off what the main topics are. So maybe you can take us through number 2.
So let's see, considering the current emerging digital fabrication technologies, how do you see traditional makers evolve? Or what is or will be the nature of future makers?
Perfect. So what do we consider it?
I think speed is one of the things that affects every aspect of everybody's life who's involved with it. So that's one word I would assign to them, is speed.
We'll see new materials. I mean, we talked about 3D printing, but also non-wovens. There's a lot of advances being made in non-wovens beyond just traditional diapers.
Meeting a lot of you guys.
You know, speaking of diapers,
I will. Good seeing you.
we're involved with Procter & Gamble.
Nice meeting you guys, by the way. Thanks for having us, by the way. Our pleasure. So.
There's a lot of science going into the whole, I just think of diapers as diapers, but no, there's all kinds of work going on to it between Kimberly-Clark and Procter & Gamble and all these others. But it's just amazing that their whole paradigms are shifting about designing custom-fit diapers for babies. You know?
That's just wrong.
Anyway.
Wow.
It's just,
That's a lot to think about.
Actually, on that note, I heard a presentation, a company that provides chemistry, and they sold a chemistry to, I think it was Procter & Gamble, that completely eliminated the odor of a diaper. And it was so effective that mothers didn't know when to change their babies, so
Couldn't sell as many diapers.
well, yeah, and so they basically
Getting
they didn't
rashes and all that,
they didn't do it. So know your customer, know your how much is too much.
You're just looking at it from a different perspective, Alan.
Wait, did we have a kid somewhere? That smelled it for taste.
Serena, explain it like you explained to us, that you're looking at it from a different perspective.
I think today's makers may come from with different backgrounds. Because let's see, 3D printing, if you can print skin, you can print leather, right? And you can be in fashion industry. But however, traditionally, right, no one can imagine that. And also go back to Jamie just mentioned, so today apparel merchandising or apparel design students, if you tell them someday you can work for a software company, they just couldn't imagine that, right? So how we could make that connection and to tell them there's a possibility that you can be a software engineer. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and in fact, over the last few years, Jamie, there's been that commercial by GE.
Yeah.
The company's gotten so far away from the original roots that when that kid says that he got a job with GE, and the father's like, so you're making locomotives? No, I'm a software guy.
Yeah.
What? So you're not making anything?
Exactly.
So you don't have a real job?
And then go back to yesterday, your presentation, and you mentioned globalization is now a very important growth strategy for a lot of, international companies. So today we all know oversee those manufacturers, what they're doing now. So if one day we want to have our innovative, 3D printing products there in China, so do we want to produce those products in US and ship those products to China, or we want to collaborate with local manufacturers in China to teach them how to do innovative manufacturing. Or what kind of collaboration model or new business model that we will have? Because for a lot of traditional manufacturers in China, they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And on one side, I feel like this digital technology gives more access to the random people to become a designer or maker. So traditionally, when we think back like to like the 60s or 70s, then we need a huge land to set up all kinds of facilities and sewing machines, a lot of capitals and land, those infra to become a maker. But these days, when you just go online, there is a sort of like a small startup company who launch the website, and then they just purchase a one 3D printing, and then they accept all the sketches and designs from like a random people, mostly the design students who are limited with the resources, and so once they order by giving their designs to them, then they just make the product and then they ship it to the designer. So kind of like there's lower border to common people to become a maker.
I think an
or
example of
designer.
that is just all the e-tailers, and e-commerce, and to your point, you want to design your own t-shirt. Well, first of all, that's a virtual inventory that they show you. There's like 6,000 that don't even exist. There's just blanks sitting in a warehouse, and then when you pick your design or you change it, then they just pull that blank and they screen print it and they ship it. So actually, like you said, the consumer gets more into the process of design. And maybe the designer's really giving them the base for the idea.
Right.
And that's really all they end up doing.
So this then goes to workforce development. Normally when you talk about workforce development, you're talking about guys in a factory. But if you're lowering the barrier to what it takes to envision a garment, design a garment, and you're loading software with a lot of this stuff, then it changes the whole educational requirements. You could hire people who you traditionally wouldn't think of being designers. And
You need engineers writing code instead of designers.
to support them. But so it's. And if the industry expands in the U.S. like we think it will, there's going to be a huge need for that, and not just for mass customization stuff.
My son is an electrical engineering student, and his roommate, he's graduating in December, his roommate graduated in June. He went to work for Google, $142,000 a year straight out of school.
That's tough, isn't it?
Computer science engineering. Yes, he has to live in California, and the cost of living is expensive, but he's single. He's bunking in with 4 guys in an apartment, and he's doing quite well for a 22-year-old student. $142,000 a year. And they're all clamoring for, everyone's competing for labor out there, so it's driving the starting salaries out of sight. But I think you're right, it'll end up changing the requirements.
Yeah, I mean, coders rule. I mean, even Under Armour. Under Armour started by a football player and a lacrosse player. And last year they declared Under Armour to be a math house. They're basically acknowledging that geeks rule, that the guys that do the coding and all the math are the ones that are going to drive the business. So I think, there's definitely going to be a smart aspect to this.
Well, that's because Kevin Plank and those people are conditioned to look at the whole situation in planning a game and say, what's the reality of what's going to work here? If you can't play to our strengths to beat these people, we'll use something else to win.
Yeah, broken plays work once in a while, but you can't plan a broken play.
Right. So he's consummate athletic attitude of how do I win in this situation today and in the future. Okay, I got to throw away my traditional way of thinking. We're no longer a running team, we're a whatever. So that's I'm going to win attitude, even if I have to get rid of my old paradigms.
And same for the universities, I think, in planning their curricula.
So will some of the creativity, you think, Keith, be lost?
I don't think so. I mean, I find that the designers, you give them a better tool, they become more creative. You can visualize more quickly. Back when I was drawing, you have to hand render this stuff, and it would take days to do stuff that you can recolor now in a matter of seconds. So I think having access to the right tools is always going to make someone more creative. But it's going to change the image of what a designer is. That's true.
As we are implementing lots of new technology to help makers make products, I think the expenses are going to shift from the overhead expenses, like number of people working for a firm, from that to the equipment side of it.
Right.
Okay. So, as I think Steve Jobs said, for a couple of days, I think Bill Gates said, somebody said, I guess, that you have to pay taxes, the robots have to pay taxes if they're replacing jobs for the human beings.
It depends on what jobs they're replacing.
Exactly.
If
So
they're
I'm not
replacing
saying-
really crappy jobs,
Right.
no. But sometimes, like, I don't get the concept of a self-driving car,
Yeah.
because I like driving cars,
Yeah, me
so
too.
I would never.
No.
But you know, there's jobs that just need to be. But you're right. I think it's going to be a huge investment, not only in technology but in capital and the factories, and it's probably going to be changing out rather quickly. So you're not going to be able to amortize the cost of a machine over 10 years.
And another interesting point that you mentioned yesterday, so if we will have a local for local, that new business model, so who will be running those small manufacturers in U.S.?
I mean, ultimately it'd be lights out. So it's like the copy center at Staples. But in the meantime, it's a contract manufacturer, so they could be taking orders from a lot of different programs, assuming that there's a common understanding, common terminology.
So I think probably our students can also see that as an opportunity.
Right. So get your entrepreneurship. I mean, the factory owner in the future doesn't need to know that much about textiles, for instance, as long as they understand what the model is for building this out.
So in discussing this, how do you perceive the dynamic changes in current or future makers in terms of expanded or shifted range of knowledge-based skill set or interdisciplinary making approach?
Well, I think to what Keith just said, that maybe the owner, he or she doesn't have to have the knowledge of the textiles, they have to have the knowledge of the whole supply chain concept and how it all fits together, so that's a changed knowledge base. They can come in and take over that plant not understanding how to make, muslin, as long as they understand how it fits in the big picture, and he or she can drive the whole process.
Okay, are there any challenges that you foresee for future makers in transitioning into the new era of innovative manufacturing?
Capital.
Capital, yeah. Exactly.
It's kind of the chicken or the egg a little bit, right?
It takes money to make money. So.
Well, and if you don't make the investment, then you can't do this new innovative stuff. So how do you start up? I mean, and more, I think, big brands, I know at VF, if it's not a 1.5 year payback on ROI, forget it. We're just not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. Now, maybe that'll change, right? But right now, that's, most companies are 2 years, but.
It's like a whole paradigm shift to the way you think about it, because maybe you think in your company, we're no longer going to ship product, we're going to ship electronic designs and patterns and make local for local, like wherever. We're not even going to have a trucking company anymore. It's just one concept I hear some companies talking about, no more transit.
So, you know, the big challenge is figuring out what's the new business model. You know, we know today that, you know, you have a year and a half, 2-year ROI or EBITDA, but if everything's shifting, what's your long-term investment strategy? And in the case of a school, you know, if you're collaborating with the business school and trying to build new models for, you know, if you're looking at total profit versus the traditional, you know, margin, then we're in this transition because not everybody agrees what the future looks like. But we still have to make money.
Well, I think it'll take one big brand to make one quantum leap to pull the rest of the industry with them. Who's going to be first to really make that change, make that leap?
The advantage of a company like VF and with different divisions, they could start off with one division kind of as a proof of concept. Even treat a couple of them, you know, take a couple of different approaches so you don't have this huge risk for the entire company. Or not.
Material supply chain is less proprietary stuff.
Can the fashion industry follow, like all the makers can follow a model which is, you know, like a shared economy, which is the Airbnbs nowadays or Uber? They don't have any assets, they don't have any employees, but they are running multi-billion companies. So as far as makers are concerned, can they jump into this disruptive innovations or shared economic concepts? Because we don't know, we are still figuring what model we are into. And so going forward, we don't know what that model will look like. Every day, some business is coming up with a different business model. So I think it's going to be interesting, a challenge to figure out what model we are actually into as makers.
Right. Yeah, and it's the Airbnb and the Uber guys that are the disruptors. It wasn't the taxi companies that came up with Uber.
Right.
So,
Somebody's got to own the equipment in the buildings still at the end of the day.
Right.
Whatever the equipment is,
Yes.
whatever the process is, right? Somebody has to own that asset and maintain it. And a lot of companies don't want to do that.
I mean, in a sense, that's what brands do now. I mean, we're sourcing companies, we're not manufacturers. So we gave up that capital ownership several years ago. Maybe that, I mean, I think we have to get into more of a vertical mentality, even if it may not be owned, but we have to think it's kind of a meta vertical. But I'm not sure what that looks like.
They like digging into those things. We don't want to educate people on
We still have 5
how
minutes.
they do it. We like, hey, how did you
Plenty
do
of
that?
time.
What about Terry? What did I tell you that? And so, I think being able to change that thought process, but we talk about.
Since I also teach global sourcing, so I can see if we are
It's got to be a two-way.
have innovative manufacturing going to change the way how we teach global sourcing. So now everything is about, okay, textile apparel industry is like a labor-intensive industry. However, if we have this innovative manufacturing, it's relatively with a lower labor input, right? How are you going to teach them? Source products, or as we mentioned, the whole model might be changed.
Well, I think the other challenge we didn't put here is labor.
Right, it's a cost difference. Like,
You know,
yeah, now we only consider like labor cost is the most important thing. And then we have to consider much more than just labor cost.
I mean, we have a stigmatism in the industry about, it's been going on for a long time. So I was describing that yesterday. When I was with Jockey, I had factories in Belzoni, Mississippi, and Maysville, Kentucky, and Millen, Georgia, really small towns, just like all the other brands had years and years ago. And you would have the grandmother, the mother, and the grandmother, mother, and daughter all working on the factory floor, 3 generations, yet try to find the next person that's willing to come in and do those types of jobs. That's not what the new workforce is really wanting to do. So how do you change the environment for the factory to attract the new young worker to compete with the tech type of industries, or just, I don't know, that other, you know, type of environment that doesn't feel like it's such manual labor. So if you can combine some robotics and change some processes, I don't know. You got to compete with those other hard type manufacturers, right? So that's a challenge.
So, which is a lot.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but that's not the case. It's going to simplify some processes.
What?
It's going to simplify some processes. If we go by his vision of making local and selling local, it's going to affect a lot of international trading policies. So it will be simplified. So I don't have to worry about all these duties and taxes which are going to increase the prices of the products going all the way from one part of the globe to another. So I'm just making it here, selling it here, no matter where I am. So it's going to simplify lots of trading issues, trading policies, or I would say. So it won't be challenging, it will be, I think, lesser of a simplification of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, you say about the process today, it's incredibly complex. Keeping track of all of the duties and tariffs and trade agreements and free trade zones.
They've done the ROI. Not to add the sustainability aspect to it, like a lot of carbon footprint and a lot of lead time.
Right.
You know, the big guys have proved that it works, and now they're pushing it down.
Well, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
And I think the government may also need to come up with some new policies for innovative manufacturing, probably like intellectual property right issues, or they're going to define country of origin, right? Traditionally, like, we have a very kind of detailed policies, like you just need to regulate, you just need to follow that. But if today we source raw materials, only raw materials from China, and then we made everything here, local for local, right? And how we could define this new product. So today we still need to see, okay, it's made in U.S., imported raw materials from China, and the new label information when we need to put on label, and what we could kind of make our whole process more transparent for consumers. I think that might also.
Well, in the case of 3D printing, your raw material is powder. So where is it? I mean, does the powder have to be made in the U.S. for the product to be made in the U.S.? So it's a different raw material supply chain.
Right, different raw materials.
So I can't see, crazy one-of-a-kind shoes or putting something on your head that has your name on it or something that is.
We are technically out of time. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to wrap up?
That's why the paradigm is wrong, because
I think our issue is we don't have enough time to present back. But anyway, somebody will have some good notes that they can pull together, so.
So I don't need them to be right, I need them to fit this hand and this hand. It's the same way with
You wanna present the,
crazy shoes.
okay.
She's a silent partner.
So you're right, when the mass manufacturers have all these parts are not manufactured, with each one is individualized. So for example, think about molding, going the same cap, for example, each cap is different for each user.
Working us hard this morning, aren't they?
Coffee sport is the longest one, by the way.
We have almost an hour for topic 4, so that's why.
It's a school.
I have to leave at 11:30 though.
Yeah.
You're presenting, you can't leave.
Sorry. Kind of double booked.
I need to leave reading. We have to teach.
Yeah, we have another department.
Oh, right. Remember something?
Engineering classes for designers.
I'm sure you handle the responsibility of all the educators.
I would try.
file share, like GrabCAD, stuff like that. You know, like being able to like share more collaboration between the maker industry, right? Being able to, you know, for example,
Everyone, we're
bolts,
time
right?
to report back.
Okay.
Jim, do you want to go
I'll go
again?
ahead, sure. No problem. So topic 2 is kind of around the makers and, you know, how will they evolve? What are some of the challenges that they're going to be faced with? I think we all agreed that one of the things that's going to really drive all of this is speed, right? I mean, that's the competitive advantage that everyone's trying to get in front of with all of these changes in technology is to, you know, increase that speed. And when I think about the supply chain, I kind of go back upstream, and I always say the same thing. It's not me down here at the maker. Okay, we can do our job in 6 weeks. So the 9 months is prior to that. It's all this development time. So I think speed to market will be very important. There was some discussion at our table around non-wovens that was interesting about, you know, all the science that's going into not just apparel, but other products like diapers and, you know, making custom fit diapers. Imagine that. So going in a lot of directions, and I think each company is kind of will evolve into this kind of based on their current positioning, and I think everybody is at a different spot in terms of their product, in terms of their you know, position in the market with whatever it is they're making or selling. We talked too about digital technology and how perhaps some of the creativeness will kind of flow or move or transition from the true designer to someone at home that's sitting in front of their computer and they can actually design their own product. So maybe some of that traditional, it's the designer that really gets to the ultimate final product will kind of go away, and it'll kind of move to the consumer to become their own designers. Software is really key here. We talked about the fact that in order for these new programs to run, you need computer science engineers to really become, I mean, they're the backbone of that. They're going to have to code the software. So do designers, you know, come from engineering, or how does all that work? Because I think that's going to be real key in terms of how the tools are developed that will be changing in the design world. And then challenges to making some of this transition. First is capital. There's no doubt about that. You know, what will companies do in terms of making this investment? What's their short-term, long-term strategies? You know, I was mentioning that at VF, if it's not a 1.5 year payback on an ROI on capital, it's not going to do it. Okay, so it's going to take somebody to make that leap of faith, be it your competitor or whatever, to kind of pull the rest of the industry or pull the rest of that product group along. Also, having a better understanding of the entire supply chain process, the demand for labor, and perhaps maybe eliminating the stigmatism that we have in the apparel industry around jobs in factories. And we think that, you know, the high tech, the robotics, all this kind of will help attract a new labor force. And really, the new business model has to kind of be redefined, because it's completely different, what we're talking about today, than how we traditionally make goods.
Thank you, Jen.
Good? You wanna go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We have again identified materials as a sticking point in the making process, you know, getting real viable materials, but also the post-processing. So how do we treat these materials? If we go from the object right to the application, they're pretty awesome. You got full color, you got full flexibility, you got geometry changes, and et cetera. But you know, the material is just not there. It's brittle, it breaks, and so forth. Volume. This is something I'm not currently facing, but also it's facing in the current maker movement. You know, you can get to like 100, and you can get to like maybe 500, but as soon as you start peaking to 1,000 to even 100K, you get up to 1 million. This is where you start choking. So a lot of limitations there. Speed. It takes too long to print. Yield. The builds are too small. So we need to, you know, bring those yields up and bring the speed up, but also the machine prices got to go down. Bridging the gap from traditional manufacturing to additive manufacturing. And a lot of people say that 3D printing will replace traditional manufacturing or injection molding and so forth. It's completely false. What it is another tool in the belt to allow us to envelop but also create new structures or new technologies that we couldn't do with traditional manufacturing, but it's a hybrid approach, so you're going to use both aspects of it. Short time for molds. Okay, kind of touched on that one already. Skill sets. So the skill sets of a traditional machinist or a tool and die maker or even a fabrication expert is to make these things. Well, most of these folks don't have any access to 3D software, or if they do, it's more after the component has been created. So we need to kind of bridge that gap too. We need to start training earlier into the process of how you digitally fabricate on top of actually fabrication. Legal. So the big thing with I've seen, and I'm sure a few other folks have as well, sometimes there's post-processes or applications that's hindering advancement or stimulating the market. The reason 3D printing is so popular today is because 2 patents ran out 5 years ago. That's the main reason. Like, it's been around for 30 years, folks. Now the cool thing is, what makes it so unique is that, with the IP being freed up, the makerspace and the maker movement really caught fire. And the same way with the post-processing or the applications, or how do we envelop from 3D printing and so forth. So this is something that's going to be a really big issue in the future, and especially in software. Software is going to be really gobbled up in what you can do and limitations and so forth. Cost. Again, I mentioned earlier, machine prices are going to go down, the yield's going to come up, build time's going to be shorter, and the batch is going to be bigger or continuous. Yeah, so prototyping. This is another unique one. So basically, we need to, some companies are uneducated that 3D printing is a great prototyping tool. They still may use the traditional means of creating patterns, and I mean patterns in a 3D form, but also could be 2D, that they don't realize that 3D printing is available to them, or it's more cost effective for them to switch over. So we need to educate those makers as well. But really, I like to see more bridging the gap from prototyping to end-use applications. So right from the printer, it goes right to the source. And a great example is hearing aids. Hearing aids are a really easy example where they're taking those parts right off the printer and then they're applying electronics right to it. Design freedom. The cool thing about being in the printing world or in this new digital fabrication world, and it doesn't have to be all 3D printing, but we can make all kinds of different design changes. We can really envelop these a lot because it's digital. I used to call it virtual machining. Now it's just digital content. And the geometries, we couldn't create certain geometries with traditional manufacturing, but we can with digital softwares. And then the last part is investing more into the chemistries. A lot of these OEMs who sell these fabrication tools or even software tools, they get really siloed, and you need to allow more chemistry being in place there, and also let more open sourcing actually happen. The biggest crime was MakerBot actually was a company that built their whole platform on open sourcing, and then when they started making more money, they closed it all off. EOS is a good example as well, where they opened it up and then they closed it off. So we need to, if we want to really spawn this maker movement of traditional manufacturing to this hybrid manufacturing approach, then we really need to open the wheelhouse for a lot of different opportunities for input.
Sorry, my handwriting is terrible, so I didn't want to be the table leader. But yeah, trying to dress up your table leader. And so we look at it from a perspective of the maker as an educator. And if you have a situation where a designer comes to a maker and says, "Here, make this," and then they say, "We can't," and so we'll make it anyway. And then when they make it, and say, "Well, this isn't what I wanted," they're like, "Well, I told you you couldn't make it." And so taking on the role, the designer's role is to be a better communicator and to more effectively communicate with everybody, then the maker's role needs to be to step up as an educator to help educate designers, and to do a better job of understanding as to how the designer thinks and how they got to where they got to be able to open up that communication. We looked at changing the evaluation process to include the designers on the back end of how you're evaluating the products that are being developed and made. Collaborating with user experience designers and looking at user compatibility, and that it may be something that was really cool in design and then it was really innovative in the making, but how does it actually interface and work with the end user? And then we talked about looking at some engineering courses for designers and design courses for engineers. You know, very much like how doctors take bedside manner classes or something like that. That how do you learn to talk to one another or put them in the same classroom and interact with one another, do some more cross-collaborative types of things within the academic section.
And for everybody, now we actually come into a 5-minute break, so stretch your legs, arms, and grab some